The night the Imperial alarms failed, Queen Vaelira heard silence before she heard panic. Silence was impossible in the palace of Nerith. The crystal walls always sang. The floor always hummed with the pulse of buried engines. Servants whispered in distant corridors. Guards shifted outside sealed doors, and the twin moons poured blue fire through the high windows of the royal nursery. But at the hour before dawn, when Vaelira opened her eyes, the palace was quiet, too quiet. She rose from her sleeping daze with one hand already reaching for the blade beside her bed. Her skin, usually a calm shade of deep cobalt, darkened with instinctive fear. A queen could ignore pain. She could ignore insult. She could ignore the slow poison of politics and the sharper poison of betrayal. A mother could not ignore an empty nursery. The door to her son's chamber stood open. Inside, 2 sleeping nests lay cold. The toys scattered across the silver rugs had not been touched. The little glass star her younger son carried everywhere was gone. So was the small carved soldier her elder son refused to admit he still loved. Vaelira did not scream at first. She simply stood in the doorway while the truth gathered its claws around her heart. Then the palace heard its queen roar. The sound shook dust from ceilings that had survived orbital bombardments. Guards came running. Commanders fell to one knee. Advisors stammered excuses before they even knew what had happened. Vaelira crossed the nursery in 3 strides and seized the captain of the night watch by the collar. "My sons," she said, her voice low enough to terrify every warrior in the room. "Find them before I begin counting the dead." Within minutes, the capital of Nerith closed like a fist. Bridges lifted, air lanes froze, market gates sealed, patrol ships carved search patterns across the violet sky. In the lower districts, where off-world traders sold broken machines and impossible spices, soldiers in living armor turned stalls upside down and dragged suspects into the street. The princes were 6 and 8 years old. Their names were Rael and Tovan, the last living heirs of a dynasty that ruled 11 worlds and kept peace among species that had once hunted each other for sport. They were not ordinary children, and no one in Vaelira's court had ever allowed them to forget it. That, perhaps, was the first mistake. For 4 hours nothing was found except fragments of fear, a torn ceremonial sash, tiny footprints in alley dust, a dropped guard token that did not belong to any guard on duty. Then, as the moons began to fade, and the city's lowest quarter filled with gray morning mist, a patrol located the missing heirs behind a cargo yard near the foreign docks. They were alive, they were unharmed, and they were sleeping on the chest of a human stranger. The man sat with his back against a rusted shipping container, one arm curled protectively around both boys. His coat was old, his boots were cracked, and dried blood marked the knuckles of his right hand. A short blade lay within reach, but he had not drawn it. His head was tilted forward in exhausted sleep, and the princes were tucked against him as if he were the safest place in the universe. The patrol commander lifted his weapon. The human opened one eye. "Don't," he said softly. "You'll wake them." No one knew what to do with that sentence. By sunrise, the stranger had been brought to the palace under heavy guard. He walked without chains because Rael had threatened to bite anyone who tried to bind him, and Tovan had announced, with royal seriousness, that the human was under our protection now. Vaelira waited in the throne hall wearing war armor instead of court silk. The armor had been grown from black crystal and shaped to her body after the siege of Vorun. Every scar on her face and arms had been earned in battle. Every jeweled mark across her throat represented a victory paid for in blood. Yet when her sons ran to her, she dropped to her knees. For one breath there was no empire, no court, no watching generals. Only a mother clutching her children so tightly that both boys squeaked in protest. Then her eyes lifted to the human. "Name yourself." "Jonah Hale," he said. His accent was rough, his posture relaxed, and his gaze moved through the throne hall with a soldier's quiet calculation. Exits, weapons, blind spots, threats. Vaelira saw the habit and hated that she respected it. "You took my sons." "No," Jonah replied. "They found me." A murmur stirred through the court. No one contradicted the queen in that tone. Not allies, not enemies, not anyone who wanted to keep breathing. Vaelira stood. "And you let them stay with you." They were scared. "They are princes, they were children." The words struck harder than any insult could have. The hall fell silent. Rael, still holding his mother's hand, looked down. Tovan pressed closer to Jonah's leg. Vaelira noticed. She noticed everything. "Why were my sons in the lower city?" Jonah glanced at the boys, and his face softened by a fraction. "You should ask them." "We had dreams," Rael said before anyone could stop him. His voice trembled, but he did not look away from his mother. "Bad ones, every night." Tovan nodded. The walls kept singing about knives. The advisors shifted uncomfortably. Palace walls did not sing about knives. Walls did not warn children. Walls did not choose sides. Vaelira's expression did not change, but the air around her seemed to chill. Continue. Rael swallowed. We told Master Elune. He said royal blood must not be ruled by nightmares. He gave us bitter tea, Tavon added. It made us sleep, but the dreams got closer. Jonah's jaw tightened. When I found them, 3 men were following them, not thieves. Professionals. They wore local cloaks, but their boots were military. One had a palace access mark burned off his wrist. This time, even the generals reacted. Vaelira stepped down from the throne platform. Where are those men now? 2 ran, Jonah said. 1 didn't. You killed him. He tried to take the younger boy. Tovan reached for Jonah's hand. There it was again, that impossible trust. Vaelira had seen grown diplomats collapse under the pressure of her gaze, but her sons stood beside this scarred off-worlder as if they had known him all their lives. Why help them? She asked. Humans are not loved in this sector. Your colonies press against our borders, your merchants break agreements. Your soldiers sell their guns to anyone with enough credit. Protecting my sons could make you enemies powerful enough to erase your name. Jonah looked at the princes, not the queen. I've seen what happens when children ask for help, and everyone waits for permission. The answer was not political. That made it dangerous. Before Vaelira could respond, the chamber lights flickered red. A captain sprinted in, bleeding from the temple. Majesty, we have a breach in the southern archives. 3 dead. Security doors opened from inside. The court erupted. Vaelira did not. She raised one hand and the room obeyed. Lock down the palace. Already attempted, the captain said. The system rejected command authority. For the first time that morning, fear moved openly across the faces of Vaelira's advisors. Jonah turned toward the nearest window. Far below, beyond the palace terraces, smoke rose from the administrative quarter. Not one fire, several, coordinated. This wasn't a kidnapping, he said quietly. It was a test. Vaelira's eyes narrowed. Explain. They wanted to see how fast you sealed the city. Which guards moved first. Which routes your sons would be taken through if they were recovered. What systems answered your command. His gaze shifted to the boys, and they wanted to know whether the children could sense the old passages. Rael went pale. Vaelira looked at him. What passages? Tovan whispered. The ones father showed us. The dead king had been gone 3 years. Vaelira had never known he had taken the boys into the ancient underways beneath the palace, tunnels built before the empire had ships, before Nerith had queens, when the first clans had hidden from sky predators in glowing stone. Only royal blood could open those doors, and now someone else knew the boys could use them. The second attack began before the first order could be given, shattered inward. Smoke grenades bounced across the throne hall, spilling black clouds that swallowed light. Figures dropped from the ceiling on silent cables, red-skinned mercenaries from the ash worlds, bone-thin assassins with mirrored masks, and at least 6 humans in gray combat gear. The court screamed, the queen moved. Vaelira's blade flashed from her wrist guard and cut the first attacker from shoulder to hip. Her sons ducked before Jonah shouted, because they had already heard the strike coming. Jonah snatched a fallen spear, drove its blunt end into one mercenary's knee, caught the man's pistol before it hit the floor, and fired twice into the smoke. Move, he barked. No one asked where. Rael grabbed his brother and ran toward the western wall. He pressed his palm to a decorative panel shaped like a flowering vine. The stone recognized him. A hidden seam opened into blue darkness. Vaelira stared for half a heartbeat. Jonah shoved a table over to block incoming fire. Majesty, tunnel now. I do not run from my own throne. No, he said, firing again. You live long enough to take it back. She hated him for being right. They entered the passage just as an explosion tore through the throne steps. The hidden door sealed behind them, muting the battle into a distant roar. For several seconds, the only sounds were their breathing and the soft pulse of ancient lights waking along the tunnel walls. Vaelira turned on her sons. Why did you never tell me? Rael's eyes filled with tears he refused to shed. Because every time we tried to tell someone something strange, they said heirs must be stronger. The accusation wounded more deeply than any blade in the throne hall. Jonah looked away, giving them privacy he had no right to understand and every right to respect. They moved through the underways for nearly an hour. The boys guided them by touch and memory. Behind the walls, the palace burned in fragments. Through small crystal vents, they saw loyal guards fighting men wearing the same uniforms. They saw servants protecting children. They saw advisors fleeing with boxes of gold instead of records or medicine. And once, they saw Master Elune, the prince's tutor, speaking calmly with a masked assassin. Vaelira's face became very still. Tovan made a sound like a broken bird. Jonah knelt beside him. Look at me, the boy obeyed. Breathe in, count 3. Breathe out, count 4. I trusted him, Tovan whispered. That's not your shame, Jonah said. It's his. Something in Vaelira shifted then. She had heard priests, generals, and scholars comfort her children with lessons about duty. The human offered no grand philosophy. He simply gave the boy a place to put the pain until he could carry it. At the old armory beneath the east tower, the tunnel widened into a circular chamber, filled with weapons older than the Empire. Spears slept in racks of white stone. Curved blades shimmered with inner fire. Armor plates hung from the ceiling like the shells of dead insects. Vaelira touched a wall, and the room recognized its queen. Light poured down. Jonah selected a short sword and tested its balance. Whoever planned this has men inside your command structure, access to your security codes, and enough money to hire off-world specialists. They won't stop at the palace. No, Vaelira said. They will try to reach the broadcast spire. Rael frowned. Why? To announce that the royal family is dead, she said. Or worse, that we have surrendered authority. Jonah looked toward the passage leading upward. Then we get there first. They emerged into the dawn beneath a sky bruised purple by smoke. The broadcast spire rose from the center of the palace complex, a needle of crystal tall enough to speak to ships in orbit and colonies beyond the moons. If a traitor controlled it, he could fracture the Empire before loyal fleets knew the truth. The courtyard between the armory and the spire crawled with enemies. Vaelira smiled without warmth. How many? Rael closed his eyes. 32 outside. More inside, Tovan tilted his head. 5 on the roof. Their hearts are too fast. They took battle drugs. Jonah exhaled. Useful children. We are not useful, Tovan said, offended. We are royal. For the next 10 minutes be both. The assault was not glorious. It was brutal, desperate, and close. Vaelira became the storm her enemies had feared for 20 years. She crossed the courtyard through smoke and fire, her blade drawing bright arcs through armor and bone. Jonah fought at her flank with the ugly efficiency of a man who had survived too many wars to waste movement on pride. The boys did not charge like heroes from a song. They warned, watched open sealed doors, and struck only when an enemy came too close. That was enough. They reached the spire doors as loyalist reinforcements, guided by the old tunnels, burst from hidden exits across the courtyard. The enemy line collapsed behind them. Inside the spire, Lord Merrix waited. He had been Vaelira's chief advisor for 9 years, a silver-tongued noble with gentle manners and patient eyes. He stood before the broadcast console in ceremonial robes, flanked by mercenaries and Master Elune. A transmission light blinked above him, ready to carry his words across 11 worlds. Majesty, Merrix said, almost sadly. You were supposed to die in the throne hall. Vaelira lifted her blade. I disappoint many men, so did your husband. He believed bloodlines could hold an empire together forever. But the border worlds are changing. Human trade routes grow stronger. Our old houses grow weaker. The empire needs a regent who understands compromise. You mean surrender. I mean survival. His eyes moved to the boys. Your sons would have been treated kindly, guided, protected from the burden of ruling too soon. Rael stepped forward, shaking with anger. You sent men to scare us in our dreams. Merrix's expression flickered. A mild neural pressure. Nothing permanent. Tovan's voice broke. You made the wall scream. Jonah's hand tightened on his sword. Vaelira did not roar this time. Her fury had gone beyond sound. Elune, she said, you taught my children history. Did you forget what happens to those who poison royal blood? The tutor dropped his eyes. Merrix sighed. Kill them. The final fight began in the heart of the Empire's voice. Mercenaries opened fire. Vaelira's armor absorbed the first volley, cracking along one shoulder. Jonah dragged the princes behind a control pillar as sparks rained from the ceiling. Rael found a maintenance panel and slammed his palm against it. The spire lights shifted, recognizing the air. Defensive shutters fell, separating Merrix's shooters into smaller groups. Good, Jonah said. Again, Tovan touched another panel. The floor beneath 3 attackers turned slick as glass. They fell hard. Vaelira reached them before they could rise. Master Elune ran. Jonah caught him at the stairwell and pinned him against the wall. For a moment, every old ghost in the human's body begged him to end the man quickly. It would be easy. It would even feel deserved. Then he looked at Tovan. The boy was watching. Jonah struck Elune once, hard enough to drop him unconscious, and stepped back. Some people deserve judgment, he said. Not all judgment has to be yours. Vaelira heard him. She would remember Merrix, seeing the battle turn, activated the broadcast manually. His face appeared across the chamber screens, ready to declare a new government. Before he could speak, Rael placed both hands on the central console. I am Prince Rael of Nareth, he said, his young voice shaking but clear. By blood and witness I deny this man command, Tovan joined him. I am Prince Tovan, the empire is not yours. The console flared gold. Royal override accepted. Across the system, every screen that had expected Merrick's received instead a live image of the queen, wounded but standing, her sons beside her, and a human stranger holding the line between them and treason. Merrick stared in disbelief. Vaelira crossed the room and struck the weapon from his hand. You wanted a new age, she said. You will see it from a prison moon. When the fighting ended, the spire was cracked, the palace burned, and the Empire had heard enough truth to shake every noble house from Nerith to the border stars. The days that followed were filled with arrests, funerals, and rebuilding. The traitors had not been alone. Merrick's had friends in distant courts, creditors among human syndicates, and promises from border lords who believed the old throne could be hollowed out and worn like a mask. Vaelira answered with investigations instead of massacres, trials instead of purges, and reforms sharp enough to frighten both enemies and allies. Jonah expected to be thanked, paid, and sent away. Instead, he was summoned to the nursery. The room had been repaired, but it no longer looked untouched. The sleeping nests had been moved closer together. The walls had been taught to dim their songs when the boys slept. 2 small chairs had been added beside the window, and on one table sat a pack of worn human playing cards. Vaelira stood there without armor for the first time since Jonah had met her. Without it, she looked no less dangerous, only more tired. My sons have asked for you, she said. They ask a lot of questions. They have asked that you remain as their sworn guardian. Jonah looked at the boys. Rael tried to appear formal. Tovan did not bother. He simply looked hopeful. I'm not one of your people, Jonah said. Vaelira's gaze held his. No, that may be why they need you. He did not answer immediately. For years, Jonah had moved from war to war, planet to planet, carrying his past like a weapon he could never put down. He had believed himself useful only in violence. But here were 2 children who had slept against his heart, because, somehow, they had recognized safety in a man who thought he had none left to give. What does the position pay? He asked. Vaelira arched one elegant brow. Rael looked alarmed. Tovan looked betrayed, then Jonah smiled. I'm kidding. The younger prince threw himself at him. Rael followed half a second later, pretending it was only to preserve balance. Jonah caught them both, awkwardly at first, then tightly. Vaelira watched the 3 of them, and something ancient and frozen inside her began, slowly, to thaw. That night the palace walls sang again, not of knives, not of betrayal. They sang of a queen who had learned that power could protect a throne, but not always a child's heart. They sang of 2 princes who had walked through fear and found their voices. And they sang of a human who had arrived by accident, slept in an alley with royal airs on his chest, and woke to discover that the universe had given him one last war. Not a war for money, not a war for orders, a war for home. Outside the nursery, guards stood watch in disciplined silence. Inside, Tovan slept with one hand clutching Jonah's sleeve. Rael dozed against his other side, still pretending he was awake enough to hear the end of an Earth story about oceans, storms, and animals that did not glow in the dark. Vaelira paused at the doorway. Human, she said softly. Jonah looked up. If you betray them, no corner of creation will hide you from me. I know if you die for them I will be angry. I know that too. Her mouth curved, almost a smile. Then live, Jonah looked down at the sleeping princes, at the small blue hands curled trustingly against him, and felt the strange unfamiliar weight of peace settle over his scars. I'll do my best, he said. For a soldier, it was a promise. For a queen, it was enough.